Welcome. Be sure to like and subscribe for more scary stories. Or I will come for you. I'd like to thank Deidre Bowman, Lindy Beaumont, and Tyshell Cady for joining the Curator's Disciples. Your viewership is so very much appreciated. If anyone else would like early access to my latest stories and an ad-free listening experience, consider becoming one of the Curator's Disciples. The link is in the description below. Story number 1. A Dark Web Red Wedding by the Curator. Inspired by Lindy Beaumont. I've been sitting on this story for a while, debating whether or not to share it. But after talking to a few close friends, I decided to go ahead and post it. I still can't believe this happened. It's going to be long, so bear with me. It's the story of how a perfect day turned into a nightmare that still haunts me. So, my name is Mike, and my wife's name is Beth. We're a pretty average couple in our late 20s, living in Overland Park, Kansas. We both have office jobs, and our biggest passion is martial arts. Beth is a graphic designer, and I'm a software engineer. We met in college, where Beth was majoring in fine arts, and I was buried in computer science classes. Beth is the type of person who lights up a room. She has a vibrant personality and an infectious laugh that makes everyone around her feel at ease. Her creativity extends beyond her professional work. She paints, sculpts, and even dabbles in photography. She's always been the one to push me out of my comfort zone, encouraging me to try new things and explore different hobbies. On the other hand, I'm more of an introvert. My world revolves around code and algorithms, but I have a deep passion for martial arts, which started in my teenage years as a way to build confidence and discipline. It's something I initially took up to deal with bullying, but it quickly turned into a lifelong commitment. Beth and I bonded over our love for martial arts. She had started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in college to stay fit and fell in love with the discipline and the strength it gave her. When we met, our shared interest quickly became a cornerstone of our relationship. We've always considered ourselves to be pretty capable and confident in our abilities to handle ourselves if anything went wrong. Little did we know how wrong we could be. It all started at our best friend's wedding. Tom and Rachel had been together for years, and their wedding was something we had all been looking forward to. It was a beautiful summer day, and the venue was this stunning garden with flowers in full bloom and fairy lights strung up everywhere. The ceremony was perfect, and the reception was even better. There was good food, plenty of drinks, and lots of dancing. Everything was going great until the best man's speech. Tom's younger brother, Jake, was the best man. He's always been kind of a wild card, but no one expected what he was about to say. In the middle of his speech, he made this off-the-cuff remark. "This wedding is almost as fun as a dark web red wedding." There was an awkward silence as people tried to laugh it off, but I could see the confusion on everyone's faces. Beth and I had no idea what he meant, and when we asked around, no one else seemed to either. After the reception, we couldn't shake the curiosity, so we decided to look it up when we got home. When we got back to our apartment, we sat down with our laptops and started searching. It didn't take long to find out what Jake was talking about. A red wedding on the dark web is a twisted, horrific event where people attend what looks like a normal wedding. But after the ceremony, it turns into a gruesome, violent free-for-all. Everyone is masked, and weapons are provided. It's basically a bloodbath. We found videos of these events, and they were the most disturbing things I've ever seen. One of the videos we watched stood out in particular. It started with a normal-looking wedding, a beautiful bride in a white dress, a groom in a sharp tuxedo, smiling guests. They were gathered in a large, dimly lit hall, the kind you'd rent for a wedding reception. The atmosphere seemed joyful, with people chatting and laughing, glasses clinking. But as soon as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, everything changed. The lights dimmed even further, and eerie music began to play. People started pulling on grotesque masks. Some were like animal faces, others like twisted human visages, and some were even more disturbing, resembling demonic creatures. Long tables were pushed aside to reveal crates of weapons, knives, axes, machetes, even a few guns. The groom picked up a large butcher knife, and the bride grabbed an axe. They turned to their guests, and the mayhem began. The camera zoomed in on the bride as she swung her axe down on one of the guests, splitting their head open with a sickening crunch. Blood sprayed across her pristine white dress, staining it red. The camera didn't shy away from the details. You could see the terror in the guests' eyes, the way their skull cracked open, the brain matter spilling out. In another part of the hall, a man wielding a machete was hacking at someone's arm, the blade slicing through flesh and bone. The victim's screams were gut-wrenching, their face contorted in agony. Blood pooled on the floor, and the camera panned to show people slipping in it as they tried to run, only to be caught and slaughtered by other masked attendees. Beth and I watched in horrified silence as the video continued. A woman with a whip was lashing out at a group of people cowering in a corner. Each strike left deep, bloody welts, and some of the victims had chunks of flesh torn away. One man tried to fight back, only to be overwhelmed by 3 attackers who stabbed him repeatedly, their knives plunging into his chest and abdomen. The camera captured every moment, the life draining from his eyes as he bled out. We saw people being decapitated, limbs severed, bodies mutilated beyond recognition. The screams, the blood, sheer brutality of it all was overwhelming. It was like something out of a nightmare, but worse because it was real. Beth and I were horrified, but at the same time, we couldn't stop watching. It was like a train wreck. You know you shouldn't look, but you can't help it. We spent hours going down this dark rabbit hole, watching video after video. We started talking about how, with our martial arts training, we could probably handle ourselves in a situation like that. It was a stupid, reckless thought, but in the moment, it didn't seem that way. We were intrigued, fascinated even. The next few days were filled with a strange mix of normal life and this dark obsession. We kept talking about the red weddings, what we would do if we were there, how we could fight our way out. It was like a game, a sick, twisted game that we couldn't stop playing in our minds. Then, one night, we found a forum on the dark web where people were discussing an upcoming red wedding. They were talking about the location, the time, and how to join. It seemed so unreal, but there it was, right in front of us. We discussed it for hours. Part of us knew it was insane, but another part of us was drawn to the challenge. We thought about our training, our skills, and how we could maybe use this as a way to test ourselves. Looking back, I can't believe how stupid we were. But at the time, it seemed like an adventure, a way to prove ourselves. We decided to join. We followed the instructions on the forum, which led us to a hidden site where we could register. It was all very secretive and encrypted. We had to provide some personal information and agree to a set of rules. The main rule was that once you were in, there was no backing out. You had to participate, no matter what. We agreed, thinking it would be an experience we could handle and walk away from. Over the next few weeks, we trained even harder. We spent hours at the gym, sparring, practicing techniques, preparing ourselves mentally and physically. We were confident, maybe even overconfident, that we could handle whatever came our way. We told ourselves it was just another challenge, another fight to win. The day finally came. We were given the location, an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. We drove there, our nerves on edge, but our determination strong. When we arrived, we saw other cars parked outside and people milling around, all wearing masks. It was eerie and unsettling, but we had come this far, and there was no turning back. We put on our masks and walked inside. The place was dimly lit, with rows of chairs set up for the ceremony. It looked like a normal wedding, but there was a palpable tension in the air. We found seats near the back and waited. The ceremony itself was short and simple, almost rushed. As soon as the vows were exchanged, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. People started moving, grabbing weapons from tables that had been set up around the room. We hadn't realized that weapons would be provided, and it added a whole new level of danger to the situation. Beth and I grabbed a couple of knives, feeling a surge of adrenaline. We looked at each other, trying to communicate without words, trying to reassure each other that we could do this. And then it began. The masks turned the crowd into a faceless mob, and the violence erupted all around us. People were slashing, stabbing, screaming. It was chaos, pure and utter chaos. We fought back, using our training to defend ourselves. At first, it felt like we were holding our own. We took down a few people, dodged attacks, and stayed close to each other. But it didn't take long for things to spiral out of control. The violence was overwhelming, and there were too many attackers. I saw Beth get knocked to the ground, and I rushed to help her. In the confusion, I lost sight of her, and panic set in. I fought desperately, trying to find her, trying to keep myself alive. The sheer brutality of this situation was overwhelming. I remember seeing Beth being dragged away by a group of masked attackers, her screams piercing through the chaos. My heart pounded in my chest as I fought my way through the crowd, using every technique I knew to defend myself. My knife became an extension of my arm, cutting through the air and, unfortunately, through flesh. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head. I turned, but it was too late. An axe came down, embedding itself in my skull. The pain was excruciating, and everything went black. I woke up in a hospital room, my head bandaged and my body aching. The memories came flooding back, and I felt a wave of horror and guilt. Beth was there, sitting by my side, her face bruised and her eyes filled with tears. She had survived, but just barely. She told me how she had fought her way through the carnage, how she had seen me go down and thought I was dead. She had managed to escape, to fight her way out of that hellhole and call for help. She told me how she had regretted every moment of that night, how she wished we had never gotten involved in something so insane. We had been arrogant, thinking our skills would protect us, but we had been so wrong. The police got involved, and there was an investigation. The warehouse was a crime scene, with bodies everywhere. The media got wind of it, and it became a huge story. Beth and I gave our statements, but we knew that nothing could undo what had happened. The guilt and the trauma were overwhelming. We had survived, but at what cost? Beth had to go through surgery to repair the deep cuts and bruises she had sustained. The physical recovery was tough, but the emotional scars were even worse. We both struggled to move on, to come to terms with what we had done. Our martial arts training had saved our lives, but it had also led us into something we never should have been involved in. The Red Wedding was a nightmare that would haunt us forever. We tried to return to our normal lives, but everything had changed. Beth was distant, often lost in her thoughts, haunted by the memories of that night. I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt and responsibility for dragging her into this. We went to therapy, trying to work through our trauma, but it was a long and painful process. One night, about a month after the incident, Beth finally opened up about what she had experienced while I was unconscious. She had been on the brink of giving up, surrounded by masked attackers, when she remembered something our martial arts instructor had told us. In a fight, the mind is your greatest weapon. She had used every ounce of her training and willpower to fight her way out, taking down anyone who stood in her path. The images of her tearing through the crowd, covered in blood, were burned into her mind. Beth blamed herself for not being able to save me sooner, for not being able to prevent what happened. But I knew it wasn't her fault. We were both victims of our own curiosity and arrogance. The investigation revealed that the Red Wedding was part of a larger network of dark web events organized by a sadistic group. The authorities managed to track down and arrest several key members, but many remained at large. The thought that these events could still be happening somewhere out there was terrifying. In the months that followed, Beth and I tried to find solace in each other and in our passion for martial arts. We returned to training, but it wasn't the same. The dojo, once a place of empowerment and growth, now felt like a reminder of our worst nightmare. Still, we pushed through, determined to reclaim a part of our old lives. We also became involved in advocacy, working with organizations that fought against the dark web and online violence. Sharing our story became a way to warn others, to prevent anyone else from falling into the same trap we had. We gave talks, participated in panels, and even helped create educational materials about the dangers of the dark web. Our relationship went through a lot of ups and downs. There were times when we felt closer than ever, united by our shared trauma and determination to heal. But there were also times when the memories were too much and we struggled to connect. Therapy helped, but it was a long road. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the judgment from others. Some people couldn't understand why we had gotten involved in something so dangerous in the first place. They saw us as reckless, even stupid. We had to learn to ignore those voices and focus on our own healing. Eventually, Beth and I decided to move to a new city, hoping for a fresh start. We found a small, close-knit community where we could rebuild our lives. We opened a martial arts studio, not just to teach self-defense, but to create a safe space for people to learn and grow. We wanted to turn our pain into something positive, to help others find strength and confidence in a healthy way. As time passed, the nightmares became less frequent and the memories less vivid. We still had our bad days, but we also had each other, and that made all the difference. We knew that we would never completely forget what had happened, but we had learned to live with it, to find meaning and purpose despite the trauma. Looking back, I realized how much we had changed. We were no longer the naive couple who thought they could take on anything. We had been humbled, scarred, but also strengthened by our experiences. And through it all, our love for each other had only grown stronger. So, that's my story. I still can't believe we went through that. If there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's that some things are better left alone. Curiosity and arrogance can lead you down dark, dangerous paths, and sometimes there's no coming back from them. I hope this story serves as a warning to anyone who reads it. Stay safe, and don't let your curiosity get the best of you. Regards, Mike. Story number 2. Faceless Fred, by the Curator. I've never posted anything like this before, but I feel like I need to get this out there. I'm not much of a writer, but I just found something so messed up that I can't stop thinking about it. This all started when I was browsing the dark web for some recreational drugs. I know, stupid, right? But at the time, it seemed like a harmless way to blow off some steam. Now, I'm haunted by what I found. Here's my story. So, I'd been hearing about how you can get pretty much anything on the dark web. I was curious, and after a few drinks one night, I decided to check it out. I wasn't looking for anything too crazy, just some weed and maybe some ecstasy for a party my friends and I were planning. I found this site that had decent reviews, and the prices seemed fair. The site was called Midnight Bliss. They sold everything from weed to more hardcore stuff, like shrooms and LSD. I decided to go for a mix of weed and ecstasy. Ordering was surprisingly easy. I had to use Bitcoin, which was a bit of a hassle to set up, but once I figured it out, it was pretty straightforward. I placed my order and got a confirmation email within minutes. They even provided a tracking number. A few days later, a plain brown package arrived at my door. Inside, everything was neatly packaged and labeled. It seemed almost professional. I felt a rush of excitement as I unwrapped the goods. It was thrilling to get away with something so taboo. Little did I know, my actions had put a target on my back. The weekend came, and my friends and I had our party. It was a blast. The drugs were top-notch, and everyone had a great time. I thought that would be the end of it. But a couple of weeks later, things took a turn for the worse. I started noticing weird things around my house. At first, it was little stuff, like my keys not being where I left them or my phone being moved. I brushed it off, thinking I was just being forgetful. Then, one night, I came home to find my front door slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it, but again, I convinced myself I must have forgotten. My name is Mark, by the way. I'm 26 and work at a tech startup in Austin, Texas. I live with my wife, Emily, who's 24 and studying to be a nurse. We've been married for 2 years. We met in college, and she's my rock. My parents, Dan and Susan, live nearby, and my younger sister, Lisa, who's 17, still lives with them. We're a close-knit family. Every Sunday, we have dinner together. Those dinners are something I look forward to every week. But then, a couple of nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange noise coming from downstairs. It was like a soft, scraping sound, like someone was dragging something across the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept out of bed to investigate. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. A few days later, I got an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You've been watched." My heart skipped a beat as I opened it. The message was short and to the point. We know who you are. We know where you live. Be careful. Attached to the email was a photo of my house taken from across the street. Panic set in. I didn't know what to do. Should I call the police? But what could I tell them? That I'd bought drugs off the dark web, and now someone was stalking me? I felt trapped. I tried to carry on as normal, but the sense of dread was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. Then, one night, things escalated. I came home late from work to find all the lights in my house on. My heart sank. I knew I hadn't left them on. As I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. It was a sickly sweet odor, like rotting meat. I gagged and covered my nose with my shirt. The house was eerily silent. I slowly made my way through the house, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the kitchen, I saw a figure standing in the middle of the room. He was tall and thin, wearing all black with a hood pulled up over his head. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The figure turned to face me, and I saw his face, or rather, the lack of it. He wore a mask, smooth and featureless, like a mannequin's face. My blood ran cold. This was Faceless Fred. I'd heard rumors about him on the dark web. I never thought he was real. Before I could react, he lunged at me. I tried to fight back, but he was too strong. He overpowered me, forcing something over my nose and mouth. Everything went black. When I came to, I was tied to a chair. My head throbbed, and my mouth was dry. I struggled against the ropes, but they were tight. I looked around and realized I wasn't alone. My parents and younger sister were also tied to chairs around the dining room table. They were unconscious, their heads slumped forward. The room was dimly lit, with candles flickering on the table. It looked like some kind of twisted dinner party. Panic surged through me. I tried to call out to my family, but my voice was hoarse and weak. Just then, I heard footsteps behind me. I twisted my head to see Fred coming out of the kitchen, carrying a large covered dish. He placed it in the center of the table and slowly removed the lid. I gasped in horror as I saw what was inside. It was the head of Emily, her lifeless eyes staring blankly at me. I felt bile rise in my throat. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some kind of sick joke. But the smell, the blood, it was all too real. Fred picked up a large carving knife and began to slice sections off her head, placing pieces onto our plates. I was paralyzed with fear and revulsion. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do anything to stop this nightmare, but I was helpless. As Fred methodically cut and served the grotesque meal, my family began to stir. One by one, they awoke, their eyes widening in horror as they took in the scene before them. Fred moved around the table, serving each of us in turn. When he reached me, he paused, his featureless mask inches from my face. "Eat," he whispered, his voice low and menacing. I shook my head, unable to speak. He grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked my head back, forcing a piece of flesh into my mouth. The taste was metallic and foul. I gagged, but he held my mouth shut, forcing me to swallow. Tears streamed down my face as he moved on to the next person. My family sobbed and pleaded, but Fred was relentless. He made us eat every bite. When the gruesome meal was finally over, Fred stood back and surveyed his handiwork. "Remember," he said quietly, "this is what happens when you cross me." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving us broken and traumatized. We sat there for what felt like hours, too shocked to move. Eventually, I managed to free myself from the ropes. My hands were shaking so badly that it took several attempts, but I finally did it. I untied my family, and we fled the house, never looking back. That's when I found the video. I was trying to make sense of everything, to understand why this had happened to us. I went back on the dark web, hoping to find some kind of explanation. That's when I stumbled upon a link to a video. The title was simply Dinner with Fred. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. The video was grainy and poorly lit, but it was unmistakably us. The entire nightmare had been recorded. Every horrific moment was there, captured for some sick audience's amusement. I watched in horror as Fred carried out his gruesome ritual. My family's terrified faces reflected back at me. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the screen. Eventually, I managed to pull myself away and shut down my computer. I felt violated all over again. Fred hadn't just terrorized us in person, he'd immortalized our suffering on the dark web. I don't know what to do now. I'm too scared to go to the police. What if Fred finds out? I can't put my family through this again. So I'm posting this here, hoping that someone can help us. Maybe by sharing our story, I can prevent this from happening to someone else. In my desperation to understand, I started digging deeper into the dark web, trying to find any information about faceless Fred. After countless hours of searching, I found a hidden forum where people shared stories and rumors about him. Most of it was speculation, but one user claimed to have inside information. According to them, Fred wasn't just some random psychopath. He had a network. This user, who went by the name Watcher, posted a series of documents that supposedly linked Fred to several dark web marketplaces, including Midnight Bliss. My blood ran cold as I realized that the very site I had ordered from had been complicit in this nightmare. The documents were a mix of email exchanges, transaction records, and even photos of some of Fred's other victims. It was all there in black and white. The drug market owner, who went by the alias Nightshade, had struck a deal with Fred. In exchange for his own safety, Nightshade would provide Fred with the details of customers who ordered from Midnight Bliss. Fred would then choose his victims from this list. I felt sick to my stomach as I read through the emails. Nightshade's messages were cold and businesslike, completely devoid of empathy. He'd rationalized his actions as just another way to make money, another way to keep himself safe. He never mentioned the real, human consequences of his deals, like what had happened to my family. One of the emails stood out. It was from Fred to Nightshade, dated about a week before my ordeal. The subject line read, "Next Target." My hands shook as I opened it. The message was chillingly brief. Mark H., Austin, Texas. Order 3478. Family of 4. Prepare accordingly. There was no doubt about it. I had been marked from the moment I placed that order. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My reckless decision had brought this horror upon my family. I felt a crushing weight of guilt and regret. But there was something else too, a burning need for justice. I couldn't let Fred and Nightshade get away with this. Over the next few days, I gathered all the evidence I could find. I saved copies of the documents, took screenshots of the forum posts, and even managed to trace some of the Bitcoin transactions back to Nightshade's wallet. I was careful, making sure to cover my tracks so that Fred wouldn't find out what I was doing. Every time I logged onto the dark web, I felt a surge of fear, but I knew I had to keep going. I spent hours researching how to protect myself and my family. I bought a new laptop and set up multiple layers of encryption and VPNs to hide my identity. I changed all our passwords and installed security cameras around the house. I even started carrying a gun, something I never thought I'd do. But despite all my precautions, the fear never left me. It was always there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder of what had happened. Finally, I had enough evidence. I compiled everything into a detailed report and sent it to several journalists and law enforcement agencies, using anonymous email accounts. I didn't know if it would lead to anything, but I had to try. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing. I started to lose hope. But then, one evening, I got a call from an unknown number. It was a reporter from a major news outlet. He said he'd received my email and wanted to meet in person to discuss the story. I was hesitant at first, worried it might be a trap, but he assured me he'd take every precaution to keep us safe. We met in a public park, surrounded by people. The reporter, a middle-aged man named Tom, was genuinely concerned. He'd done his own research and confirmed that the documents were authentic. He promised to expose Nightshade and Fred, but he needed more information. Over the next few days, Tom and I worked together to piece everything together. He was thorough and meticulous, and his dedication gave me a glimmer of hope. Finally, the day came when his story was published. It was a bombshell. The headline read, "Dark Web Horror, Inside the Network of Faceless Fred and Midnight Bliss." The article went viral, and soon, law enforcement agencies around the country were involved. Nightshade was arrested, and several other dark web marketplaces were shut down. There was even a nationwide manhunt for Fred. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, we'd be safe now. Despite the arrest of Nightshade and the increased law enforcement attention, I knew our ordeal wasn't completely over. Faceless Fred was still out there, a specter haunting my every waking moment. The fear was always present, a shadow that lurked just behind every thought. We tried to rebuild our lives, but it was difficult. My parents and Lisa moved in with me for a while. We found some comfort in being together, in supporting each other through the trauma. I decided to see a therapist, something I had never considered before. Talking about what happened, about my guilt and fear, helped more than I expected. I went to counseling too. I needed to heal, to find a way to move past the horror that had invaded my life. One night, as we were all having dinner together, the doorbell rang. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed the gun I now kept nearby and cautiously approached the door. To my immense relief, it was Tom, the reporter. He looked serious, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. "Mark, I have some news," he said. "Can I come in?" We sat down in the living room, and he explained that the FBI had been tracking Fred's movements. They believed they were close to catching him. The information I had provided, combined with tips from others who had come forward after reading the article, had given them a solid lead. It was only a matter of time. That night, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. Maybe this nightmare would finally come to an end. The next few days were a blur of anxious waiting. I checked the news constantly, hoping for updates. And then, finally, the news I'd been praying for, Faceless Fred, had been captured. It was a surreal moment. I felt a flood of emotions, relief, joy, and a lingering sadness for everything we'd lost. Fred was going to pay for his crimes, and I could finally start to believe that my family was safe. The trial was long and grueling. Fred showed no remorse. Sitting there with his featureless mask, a chilling reminder of the terror he had inflicted on so many. But the evidence was overwhelming. The documents I had found, the video, and testimonies from other survivors painted a clear picture of his guilt. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict, guilty on all counts. When the judge handed down the life sentence, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Fred would never hurt anyone again. Nightshade, too, received a lengthy sentence for his role in the horrific scheme. Justice had been served. In the aftermath, our lives slowly began to return to something resembling normalcy. The nightmares didn't disappear overnight, but they became less frequent. My family and I grew closer, finding strength in our shared experience. I found a new job at a different tech company, hoping for a fresh start. I still think about Emily every day. Her memory is a constant presence, a reminder of the love we shared and the life we had planned together. I visit her grave often, bringing flowers and talking to her about everything that's happened. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and I would do whatever it took to bring justice to those still living in fear. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning. This is the Curator. I hope you've enjoyed today's scary stories. Until next time.